What's up, folks? I want to talk about my league starter for the Trial of the Ancestors and what was my take on the Sacrifice gym, one of the new gyms added with the patch. I was originally going to go Atziri's rule with Sacrifice, but Sacrifice did not work with triggered gyms, so I had to do a bit of a pivot and ended up going Wave of Conviction. This is a Sacrifice HP stacking Wave of Conviction Ignite Elementalist. We have a 10,000 HP. And we are doing some sweet damage with this because we are able to scale the added effectiveness of Wave of Conviction with a massive amount of chaos damage on top from the Divergent Sacrifice support. How does this all come together? How does it work? And how does it behave within the game? As far as mapping is concerned, of course, it's going to be amazing for mapping because it's an Ignite build with the Barracks Respite, and Barracks Respite makes it super smooth to map with. You just click on things and things on the other screen will die because it is just a very nice proliferation ring. The damage overall in terms of rares and doing things like that right now for me is about a 10 to 11 mil, which is really good for just basic everything content except the Uber level content. And as far as Ubers are concerned, I haven't taken it against Ubers personally because it is a Dissolution of Flesh build and it is a playstyle that maybe doesn't work so well with those fights. But in terms of what it can do in Tota, I'm currently ranked 1200 on this guy, and I don't see any reason that I couldn't keep going forward. I don't really have a problem with the Titanic Shells or anything like that. I am able to kill them just fine with the current level of DPS in the build, and just keep ramping it up from there. Now, how does it all come together? That's the question, and what we got to start off with is that we are Wave of Conviction, we are Sacrifice, we are stacking a lot of HP, and how are we getting that HP? We are using the new Utula's Hunger, Utula's Hunger? I don't know, I call it a weird thing. This chest piece gives you a lot of life, and you don't need to get life anywhere else. Can you beat the chest piece by going things like Comb's Heart and other life-based items? Yes, but the problem is when you start having a lot of uniques in a build like I do with Polaric Devastation, you're going to have yourself an Emberwake in there, you're going to have Legacies of Fury, maybe getting one of the new Replica Dragonflight's amulets. You start losing a lot of pieces that normally would have HP, and then being able to have one piece of gear that has all your HP on it and then scaling up from there is very powerful. The only downside of it is that your other rares are going to be a little bit weird to either buy or find or make because you're not allowed to have HP on them. Most cases it's fine, but it does get a little bit tricky if you're just looking for off-the-shelf items that you can slap in here and make work. But this chest piece gives you 994 life. If you have a high-rolled one, it rolls from 700 to 1,000, so just look for a decently high-rolled one and get yourself that going. And then you're going to be traveling around the tree everywhere, getting yourself a bunch of life, as you do, because we are scaling the Dissolution of Flesh, which means that we have 29% more max life on top of the life we already have, and we're going to pick up all the life masteries, so we have another 10% more life from that, plus the flat 50. The rest of the mods on there do not work for us. I just grabbed it because I have to stack life anyway, and if I'm going to be by all the nodes, that 10% extra is still a couple thousand on top of the build. So from there, what happens to the playstyle is that you are running around, and when you take damage, or when you cast, you're sacrificing, but you are regenerating very rapidly because you have Eternal Youth. This makes it so your energy shield recharge is actually applied to your life. Now, something that's been clarified and needs to be addressed is that taking damage will stop your recharge. So if I go over here and have these guys hit me, you'll notice that once I have the bar go down a little bit more. Oh yeah, I'm in the wrong graphic settings. Whoops. Another thing to keep in mind, if you are a person who enjoys using the gameplay of hide reservations, don't do that. If you're Dissolution of Flesh, you won't actually see your HP. So if I walk over here and start getting hits, you'll notice that my HP bar will start getting reserved. I need more things to hit me. Here, you guys, you hit me. There we go. You'll see my HP start getting reserved from the top like this, and once I cast, you'll see it being able to start regen once the damage stops being taken. Come on. You'll see it's regenning there. So it'll regen once you have 2 seconds that you don't take damage. And your recharge will be interrupted if you reserve HP that you already have. So if you sacrifice and then take a hit down, you'll be fine. But if you take a hit when you are at full life, your regen your recharge will stop. There's a lot of words here that start with R's. It will stop, so you have to be a little bit mindful of the fact that sometimes it will feel like your regen isn't popping off right away, and then your recharge will also be stopping at the same time. So it's a playstyle that you're going to have to get used to. Those of you who used to play back in the day and are very used to Wicked Ward's playstyle, it's a very similar setup to that. So keep in mind right out of the gate, Disillusion of Flesh is not a playstyle for everybody. You do have to find 2 seconds where you can step out of combat, get yourself to start healing again, and then you'll be able to keep casting. But that's why I haven't taken against Ubers, because that playstyle sometimes doesn't work with those things. Like Uber Eater are a bit difficult to find a 2-second window where you just don't take any damage whatsoever. But that's how we've scaled life. Now how do we scale damage? I personally went with a cane of Kolomak. I love these canes. I love using them in builds. I basically use probably 50% of my builds use them. But you do not have to use this. The biggest issue with canes of Kolomak is that they are exceedingly weird to find and come upon. This one cost me 6 divine, and it's a very, very badly rolled one, and I don't want to spend another divine re-rolling it, but it's because I just love using these canes, so I ended up with this as my weapon. You can use a normal staff with +2, +3, +4, whatever you want to use on it, or use 2 one-handers instead. The biggest reason I went for Wave of Conviction is that you are not competing with Righteous Fire gear so much. If I went Fireball, which has a higher damage effectiveness, my DPS would be a little bit higher, but I would be competing with Righteous Fire gear. In this case, you can actually go for +1 lightning gems, +1 physical gems, +1, or it's the same thing on stabs, +2, +2, whatever you want to do, and you don't have to go looking for +3 fire gems, which is more so what you end up having on Righteous Fire, because that gear is a lot more expensive as a result of those. So I went with a cane of Kolomak. I'll leave a couple links in the pubs for different ones for 1 hands, 2 hands, and the cane variant as well, so make your selection there. In the cane of Kolomak, though, we do get a lot of power from Divergent Sacrifice. Divergent Sacrifice gets boosted because of its alt quality and the fact that you get way more of your current life as base sacrifice damage, and then that gets scaled up again. So by putting it in here and rolling it well, you can get up to I think it's a 28 is the highest you can get from putting it in a cane of Kolomak. So you can get 28% of your current life sacrificed, boosted up by 48% in terms of how much you gain from that damage. So you can get up to 1400 very easily if you have 10,000 HP in there. Then the normal stuff, Deadly Elements, Woken Deadly Element, of course, is better. Unbound Elements, Woken Unbound, once again better. Awakened Burning Damage, mine is only level 2 because the Cane of Kolomak gives it +3, so I only needed that for the +1, and same thing with the Awakened Added Fire. It's a +5, or it's a +1 in here because it's level 5 plus the 3. You get the idea. These are the general links that you would always use for Wave of Conviction. There's little changes here and there. You could use Empowers if you wanted to. It's a bit stronger than Awaken Add and Fire because you get a couple more levels, you get a bit more base damage, but either way, it doesn't really matter. The levels for Wave of Conviction are still fairly strong in terms of, even though we do have a base sacrifice damage of 1300, whatever we have, you still want the big base because that's what scales Ignite at the end of the day once you start really getting in the factors of the rest of the build. Of course, Polaric Devastation is going to be best in slot. It's the easiest way to get Ash in a build unless you want to use Infernal Cry, or if you're wanting to do something with Zoph's Blood. Polaric Devastation, when I bought this, they were expensive. They've been farmed a lot more. They're probably a lot cheaper now than they used to be. For mapping, Barracks Respite is going to be bar none the best thing there is. I don't like using Ignite Proliferation. I don't like using the Prolif on gloves. I always just go for Barracks Respite because it is the most consistent in terms of Ignite Prolifing across the entire map, and you get your Shock Prolif as well if you are an Elementalist. So that for me is a very, very nice thing to be able to Prolif both. That means your damage on all mobs is a whole lot higher, so I just end up using that as my go-to ring for mapping. Then when it comes to bossing, of course, Barracks Replica Emberwake on a build like this is what replaces Barracks Respite, because you are able to cast quite frequently. You know, if you're casting like this, I have a 3-second ignite. I can more than readily reapply that ignite all the time when it comes to having Replica Emberwake in the build, and the ignite duration and the faster ignites don't really bother me. It's just a massive DPS boost. That's how we get to where this is right now, which is about 11 to 12 mil. And if you wanted to, you could push this build all the way up to 20 mil as the highest ignite that I've assumed you could get if you really wanted to gear it out. We are using one of the new replica Dragon's Fangs Flight for Wave of Conviction. These fluctuate in price heavily, so definitely if you're going to be looking into a setup like this, do look at the difference between getting one of these and maybe getting something that's a +2 with damage over time fractured onto it. Not a tier 1 damage over time, but just get like a 20% damage over time fracture on it, make it a +2. That's going to cost maybe somewhere in the ballpark of 4 to 6 divines or so if you get unlucky lucky, depending on how things go. This is worth it if it's cheap. It may or may not fluctuate in price depending on who's running what and what builds are meta at the moment, but this is a very cool amulet. It gives you a little bit more reservation, so you can fit in Defiance Banner into the build as well. And if you don't have it, just drop Defiance Banner. It's not really going to be that big of a thing for you. I have 1300 armor here. If I drop Defiance Banner off, I have, well, once it goes away from the screen, I still have, 1100 armor. It's not the be all end all of everything. You're still going to, take some hits from physical stuff, but it's a little bit of a layer of protection. If you don't have Replica Dragon's Fang, don't worry about it. Just take out the Enlighten, take out the Defiance Banner. You're good to go. Your life is not going to be changed dramatically by having those in the build. Then in terms of what else you're running, of course you're going to be running Legacies of Fury if you want that maximum damage. The Scorch effect is very, very strong here, and if you want the explosions and stuff, you can worry about it. I just did it for the Scorch effect because there's a lot more damage that way. And the nice part about these boots is that, once again, they are uniques. They don't have HP, but we're going to claw back some of that by using Utula's Hunger. Usually I would strive away from using these boots, and because at this point the build would have too many uniques and I wouldn't have enough HP, but because of the Dress Piece, we're able to actually stretch ourselves a little bit thinner and get another unique into the build, which is very, very good for damage. The biggest thing about this is I do not have the enchant for if you haven't crit recently. You have a 120% increased crit chance. That is something to always keep in mind when you're looking at any kind of elemental build that uses Ignite. Elemental overload uptime is key when it comes to keeping your damage up. So with this build, I am having to cast pretty rapidly, and I am using a Diamond Flask to make sure that I am proccing that elemental overload. If I had the enchant on my boots, it would be a lot easier. I wouldn't have to cast as often, and it would be a lot smoother. So I just haven't gone and gotten that from lab. Definitely get that if you're going to be going into this kind of playstyle. Very, very important for just that elemental overload uptime. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you are looking at Elementalist DPS, besides just elemental overload, you got to also take into the fact that convergence is usually on for DPS calculations, but there is also the window where it's off. So your DPS is actually somewhere in between a couple numbers depending on if elemental overload is up, if convergence is on. You get the idea. It's not always going to be the same amount of DPS, but it's a consistent DPS, which does feel a lot stronger as a result of how that all ends up working out. The rest of the gear on the build is your bog standard unique rares, not uniques. I just wanted to get a little bit more tankiness into the build, so I ended up buying a Fractured Chaos Resist helmet and did some mana reservation stuff on there, put the mana reservation implicits as well. The implicits could be a little bit better, it could be higher rolls, could be different implicits. These are just what I had on hand at the time from the currency I was using, because this was my league starter, so I didn't really have a lot of stuff to throw at it. And I just needed one resist with reservation, and that's all, and I was just rolling for it because, once again, we cannot get life on our gear. So just rolling for basic suffixes is a lot easier if you buy a fractured item that already has one of them and you're rolling for the other one. So I just kept rolling until I got this, and then I slapped down Fizz's Fire just to give myself a little bit more of that physical resistance. Same thing with this one. I was just looking for whatever had the suffixes I need. I saw this one on sale and I just picked it up. So we got Lightning Resist, Strength, and Chaos. The build needs a bit of Chaos Resist and Lightning Resist because we don't have enough from the rest of the pieces. And then Strength was just more life. It is the only life modifier we can get because it's not tagged as life. So if you want and have space for it, you can pick up some Strength, slap it on your gear, and that's going to give you some life. And then I just put some armor on the top end. As far as implicits go, fire damage over time, and I do use fire exposure on this build. Part of the reason I use fire exposure is that Wave of Conviction will not always be doing the fire exposure. We have so much base chaos damage that on certain enemies I was noticing I actually wasn't exposing for fire like I thought I would be. I think it's because I am doing more chaos damage than the fire damage in certain situations. And even though Wave of Conviction should do exposure to the elemental resistance that is the highest damage taken, there is no chaos exposure, so it's just not doing it. And as a result, I did end up getting a little bit of exposure on my gloves just to guarantee that every single time I hit, I have at least some exposure, because we are an elementalist and I do want to make sure that I use the Mastermind of Discord to its fullest effect. That does mean we don't get the full effect of Shaper of Flames, because we're not actually doing the ignite as the highest ignite, but realistically it's still a lot of damage. It's still plenty to have in there, and it's whatever. It's not the biggest issue at all in the build. And same thing for belt as the gloves. You're going to be looking for your suffixes. In this case, I just got some strength, chaos resist, slapped on a cold resist, and it's on a strength base, because once again, that's something we can do for life. I haven't even blessed orbed this thing. Like I said, this build was doing everything I needed to, because it was smoothly sailing through the content. So I haven't divine things, I haven't blessed orb things. I just couldn't be bothered to do any of that. As far as how you're gonna put your gym links and stuff, because you do notice that I have 4 blues here, I've got off colors here. If you're gonna be running this variant, then you're gonna be putting, of course, everything on the Kano Colmac, and your oodles, you're probably going to be doing what I did, which is kind of a pain in the butt to do, but you're going to be going 1 2, back and forth on 2 3 2 3 3 4 3 4 until you get the 4 sockets, and then you add the last couple sockets in, making sure they're red or whatever color you need to be. Or if you want to take a shortcut, you could always buy an all white version of this armor from somebody who's been double corrupting them, and then that way you don't have to worry about it. Slap it in there, get it 6 linked, and you're good to go. It's a bit of a pain to do it that way, but sometimes you just got to work around those limitations when it comes to a very powerful chess piece like this for a build. The rest of the links you can assume are Malevolence, Purity of Elements, because we don't have a lot of resistances anywhere, and Determination for that armor. I use a little bit of Clarity because I do have a little bit of a mana thing. If you see, if I just hold the button down, you'll see that my mana does actually drain fully out. It's not a problem in standard play that I have to really worry about it all that much, but it is a thing that to keep in mind. You have to get a little bit of Clarity just to keep up with it, because you're not casting that often anyway. When it comes to Arcanist Brand, Flammability, Flame Surge, Elemental Weakness, we do have Whispers of Doom, so that we can get 2 of those in there. That's really big for ignites, just getting that resist as low as possible. So I have both of those curses in there, and of course Flame Surge to do a little bit more DPS on top from the ignites that we're already doing. There is a play to be said about doing something like Defiled Forces and getting an even faster ignite, but I kind of just ran out of points on the tree, so I didn't really worry about it, and it was a lot easier for me to just do it this way, just to make it a lot easier on myself to Arcanist Brand it and just have these both in here and just ignore the Defiled Forces, because I do have a 3-second ignite. I also have Vortex with Combust and Divergent Purifying Flame on cast on damage taken. Vortex Combust is there just to lower resistances a little bit more as I'm walking around, because it will always ignite, because we are elementalists, so that's just one way to do it. There is a chance that this is the thing that crits, and then that takes away your boot enchant if you got the boot enchant going, but it's not that big of a deal. It's still better for you, and it gives you that chill area effect around you, so things are a little bit slower. It's a little bit more defensive feeling as a result of that. And then we're using Divergent Purifying Flame. I slap this on most builds if I can fit it in somewhere, just on a low level cast on damage taken. So if you take a hit, Divergent Purifying comes out and they take 5% increased damage. It's just a little bit of a damage boost on top of everything. And if you're far away from mobs, linking it to Combust means this can also ignite and also deal with the ignite that you need to have dealt with from the activator of Combust. So it's a nice little combo. If you want to slap that in there, by all means do so. Molten Shell, cast on damage taken. I ended up not wanting to press this myself, so if you wanted to, you could do Molten Shell just on, another hotkey and press it yourself. I just did level 20 cast on damage taken. You have so much HP that if you take 3000 life, to trigger this, that's not that much of your HP actually used up yet, so it was all good for me just to have it on auto cast. Especially in things like Toda, it's pretty good. Just if you're running around getting pelted by things, you have this pop off and you have a little bit more of a barrier. It doesn't save you from one shots and anything like that, but it still works pretty well. Up to you whether you want to hand cast it or self cast it. If you self cast it, just switch it out for increased duration or whatever you want to do. And then Flame Dash, second wind, just as my movement skill of choice. I love using Flame Dash for everything. If you're using different weapons, if you want to use a shield in the setup, then you could always use shield charge, whatever you want to do, but Flame Dash is always going to be my go-to, so I just love Flame Dash and everything. That's just a personal preference when it comes to my own playstyle. And when it comes to the tree, very basic leveling tree for this. Do not look at the tattoos. I have life and reservation efficiency in here. These were just ones I found at the very beginning of the things. I just kind of slapped them wherever. I've got a mana regen in there. You don't need them. These are like ADC. Don't worry about it. You don't need this 1%. You, of course, can use it in place of things like Enlighten and stuff. If you have Enlighten 3 and you need a little bit more, by all means, slap in some reservation efficiency if you're really wanting to push the build that far, but you don't have to. The life nodes, you can replace strength nodes with life nodes, and they're a little bit more life, but realistically, it's whatever. It's not really worth it. And you have to make sure that, you know, you don't lower your stats too much. Mess with them as much as you want. Regen, if you don't want to level clarity up, you could slap a couple regen tattoos in there. That'll also work as well. Up to you how you want to go about doing that. As far as the large tool goes, just using some smoking remains for a bit of smoke clouds here and there. You could spec up to widespread destruction. Prismatic heart is good because you get that resistances that we're missing. Nothing really fancy there, just kind of bog standard stuff. Same thing with the mediums. Wasting Affliction is by far the strongest of the damage over time notables on mediums, and then I'm using Flow of Life just to get myself a little bit more life, a little bit more damage over time. The regen doesn't do anything. I just wanted to break 10,000 life, so I used Flow of Times. They're probably not the best when it comes to DPS, but that's the one I ended up going with. In terms of the other ones, we are using the I'm using the Grand Spectrums in here. When I got these, they were 10C a piece. A couple days ago, these were 2 divine a piece. You are far, far better off going with rare jewels if that is the case. Do not go for these. It's just not worth going for Grand Spectrums at 2 divine. It's a whole lot cheaper to pick up rare jewels that have life, fire damage over time, burning damage, whatever you need on them. They'll be far more effective for you cost-wise to do that instead, and so you just switch out these 3 Grand Spectrums for those and you'll be much, much better off. As far as the Watcher's Eye, I just go for the damage over time with Malevolence there because it is the cheapest of the Malevolences. If you want to get the damage over time one, that's way more expensive than the speed one, so I just use the faster one just because it's just better for me that way. And then the last bit of stuff for this build to consider is goes back down to the playstyle. The playstyle is a little bit wonky with, like I said, being Dissolution of Flesh. If you are someone who likes to be in combat longer and don't really want to worry about your HP, looking at your globe, looking at whether or not you're going to be having to duck out, dive in, stuff like that, it's probably not a playstyle for you. If you're okay with that, if you've played Wicked Ward in the past, then you're probably going to find yourself right at home with a playstyle like this, where you just got to keep an eye on the globe. If the globe goes down to here, peace out of there, flame dash out, run away, wait 2 seconds, bam, pops right off, and you're good to go. It's actually really good on Toda. As long as you don't get one shot, you can always find a window where 2 seconds where you don't take damage by just going to the outskirts of the arena, or just, you know, hugging a wall and glitching it so the AI decides to walk away from you. It's really good. I've really had a lot of luck in doing that, in terms of just running to the defensive line of the enemy, touching the wall a little bit, and then coming back and just knocking out the defenses. And if you take damage, you back off a little bit, back in again. It's a very, very nice playstyle for all of that. So yeah, I think I've covered most of what's in the build in general. There's a lot of things you can, of course, tweak and make better and get better gear than I have. You could even get like +2s and swap this into the chest piece and then run that. There's a whole lot of ways you can make this. Like I said, the top end I kind of configured. Could be possible on this build is about 20 million Ignite DPS, which is really, really solid. It would feel amazing to have that level of DPS, but for me, I don't realistically care. I don't need to take it that far. I'm more than happy with the state of the build as it is currently, and I just kind of left it here as an option. And yeah, if you have any questions, do leave it in the comments below. Like I said, I'm gonna put in a couple pubs, one for the Cane of Colmac, one for one-handed setup, and you can choose to do whatever you want with those. And that is the end of the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned some stuff and enjoyed some weird interactions with Sacrifice. I'm hoping to maybe do something else with this gym at some point in the league, but we'll see. We'll see how time goes and how many builds I gotta get to. That's it for me. You guys have a good one. Peace.